It's always a hot election issue with an increased police presence high on many voters' wish lists. According to a survey of 1,000 people across the state, 84% believe police resources are already stretched. The Police Association has drawn up a state election submission for candidates. Among their priorities, new stations, refurbishments and, of course, more police officers.
We want an increase in strength of 3,000 police across the state in the term of the next government.
Minister John Watkins announced plans yesterday to recruit an additional 750 police officers by the end of 2011. 96 would be assigned to the northern region and just 5 to Newcastle. Not enough, according to the Police Association. Drugs, not heroin but rather methamphetamines or ice, has also become an election issue for police. This addictive stimulant is not only ruining lives, but it's also a major drain on police and court resources.
It's a major consideration and concern for our members because the nature of the drug, it gets hold of people, they become dependent very quickly, they become irrational and paranoid and extremely violent.
Kel Graham wants officers protected with suitable legislation, along with a rehabilitation centre built in Newcastle. And the police force isn't the only area which is under-resourced. According to Arne Sprogus, Newcastle and the Hunter are missing out on vital health funding, creating a chronic shortage of qualified staff and long waiting lists.
We do not get our fair share of state health funding. We don't get a fair go, and it shows in the work that our people have got to do by comparison to what's done in Sydney. We've got some of the busiest facilities in the state.
And topping his list of priorities for the state, mental health.
Acute mental health services are a disaster, and it's an embarrassment to this government.
Tomorrow night in our special election series, Coal and Climate Change. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
While it may not be one of the prettiest or most affluent suburbs, according to those who know best, Windale has come a long way over the past few years.
There were times when you wouldn't walk past the shops because of people dealing in drugs, drinking, smashing bottles, etc. That's all gone. We've cleaned that up.
But while the suburb may be safer, according to a University of Sydney report by Professor Tony Vinson, it's still one of the most disadvantaged areas in New South Wales. Its high rate of early school leavers, long-term unemployment, low incomes and a general lack of computer skills is to blame.
One of my criticisms of Tony Vinson report today was, although it was a rehash of a lot of the statistics, and the statistics don't lie, but they're bland. He hasn't come up here and spoken to us who have developed things in the community since.
State Liberal candidate for Lake Macquarie Ken Paxanos grew up in Windale and says even in the 60s the suburb had its problems.
It's not something that's new, it's a perennial problem that comes up when these studies are done, and Windale is always in that list.
Madeline Bond, NBN News. From his easy and entertaining manner at the Newcastle club today, you'd never guess this man has spent the past 40 years dealing with incredibly traumatic situations. While Lieutenant Colonel Don Woodland has seen more death and devastation in his lifetime than anyone could ever guess, he still tries to look on the bright side.
I must try to get something good out of even the most devastating situation, and when I do that, then that sort of gives you a sense of encouragement for the next day.
During his time working as a trauma counsellor, he comforted Stuart Diver's family immediately after the Thredbo landslide, offered support to the families of those killed in the Port Arthur massacre, and was on the scene during the Kempsey and Grafton bus crashes and Newcastle earthquake. He was in town today talking to the Newcastle Rotary Club about his life and book, Picking Up the Pieces. He had this advice for anyone dealing with trauma.
Deal with the ramifications of trauma, because if you just put it in the cupboard and shut the cupboard and hope it'll go away, it only festers.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
It started out like any other race. The finish was just as routine, but it wasn't until the warm down when things took a turn. Newcastle jockey Dale Spriggs fractured both his wrists in a fall the cameras barely picked up, but best described by the man himself.
The horse in front of me that finished second last, just past the post, he was only going very slow, not much more in the canter, and his horse snapped his leg and fell over, and I couldn't avoid him, went straight over top of him.
The 42-year-old was one of 3 hunter jockeys injured in separate race falls, including Pat Ferris, who remarkably suffered only minor concussion after this tumble. They were taken to Corindai Hospital.
The nurses really looked after me good. They didn't have a doctor there, so they looked after me the best they could.
His wife Leander, who grew up in the district, says waiting an hour for a doctor was unacceptable.
The revenue that comes from racing needs to be generated back into hospitals so that these guys can be safe when they ride.
The Hunter New England Area Health Service says if Mr Spriggs' injuries were life-threatening, he would have been airlifted out of Corindai immediately. It was his family's wish to be taken to Newcastle, which meant waiting 6 hours for an air ambulance transfer.
He received that care fairly quickly. Now, I believe in the circumstances, the care he received was appropriate and the staff did a fantastic job.
As for Dale, he's had a ruptured spleen, a broken collarbone, punctured lungs and broken ribs. He says 2 fractured wrists won't stop him from making a comeback in 2 months' time. Adam McKilrick, NBN News.
Coach Brian Smith couldn't have been happier with the 30-18 result or the performance of his youthful side in Darwin at the weekend. But it's this Saturday he'll get to assemble his main men for the club's final hit out at Cessnock, so long as they're fit.
We won't be taking any risks at all with anybody.
Andrew Johns is among those in question. A strained hamstring threatens to ruin his chance of playing once more in his old hometown.
But he won't play unless we're really convinced that he's up for it, and that means he's got to do some real quality training this week.
In contrast, Steve Simpson has battled through an injury-plagued off-season and plans to put it all behind him on Saturday night.
I'd like to play like half a game, be good straight if I can. Obviously as much time as I possibly can. If I can get out sort of 30 or 40 minutes would be great.
While some clubs are already counting the cost of injuries suffered in trial matches, Simpson is like most players in that he doesn't want to start the season cold.
I think it's fairly important to get a run under the belt and a good solid one at that.
Jim Callanan, NBN News. Always a hard marker, James Niddies knows he could have finished better at the New Zealand PGA, but outright 5th has moved him the right way as he attempts to earn playing status in the US this year. He's now 7th on the Australia Order of Merit and flew to Thailand today for the $3.1 million Johnny Walker Classic with fellow Novocastrian Nick Flanagan. What a weekend for Cooks Hill clubby Ellie Hewitt. She was named the State Junior Surf Life Saver of the Year on the state south coast.
I was really surprised. I didn't expect to get it at all. It feels great.
Her clubmates capped off a great day for the Hunter Branch Club with Emily Chaffee and Eliza Smith finishing 1-2 in the Iron Woman event. Injury cost Emma McNaughton any chance of winning the National Downhill Mountain Bike Series, but it didn't stop her from winning the final event at Mount Beauty in Victoria.
Very, very happy with my run. Sort of went off the track a little bit, but I guess stayed on the most and got down the hill the fastest.
Adam Smithson didn't have such a good final race, but still finished 2nd for the series overall. And the Northern Zone trap shooting squad has been selected in Guyra after 2 days of clay target competition. Singleton's Helen Gay claimed the double A grade shoot, missing just 1 of 85 targets.
The state government is spending $140 million beefing up the docks at Port Kembla near Wollongong to receive car imports. But with the auto industry saying it would rather unload ships in Newcastle, a group of local businessmen, including Jeff McCloy and Hilton Grujon, see an opportunity.
Go back to rule 1, the customer is always right. And if a customer wants to be giving you business, it's not the time to turn them away.
They're preparing a bid to build a multi-purpose terminal on the old BHP site at Mayfield.
There is the potential for as many jobs to be created from that site as we lost when BHP closed their primary steelmaking. And that's about 2,000 jobs, both on the site and in the support infrastructure.
They're prepared to spend $200 million building the terminal, saying the key to Newcastle's future is to diversify.
When you consider fine wool from the New England being shipped out through Brisbane and Sydney, you wonder why. As with cotton, and there's plenty of other commodities that can be used in that port.
The state government will consider all bids after the April deadline. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
You don't have to look far in Newcastle to find an election issue looming on the horizon, with more than 60 coal carriers waiting to come into port. It's the biggest coal loading facility in the world. 90 million tonnes are shipped through here each year. And with burning coal one of the major causes of global warming due to greenhouse gas emissions, the heat is being turned up on Newcastle ahead of the state election. Since the Industrial Revolution, the burning of fossil fuels to supply our energy needs has substantially increased the amount of carbon dioxide entering the Earth's atmosphere, leading to climate change.
We are facing a looming problem in the world with high greenhouse gas emissions, with growing greenhouse gas emissions, and the impact of those on climate and climate change. So clearly it's an issue that's recognised pretty much worldwide that does need to be addressed.
Some political parties are calling for the coal industry to be shut down, with the Greens likening Australia to a heroin dealer feeding the habit of the world's dependence on coal. But the state Labor government says such a shutdown would result in economic disaster.
Coal provides 85% of Australia's electricity at the moment, so it's very difficult to shut down all the coal-fired power stations in the short term.
Cleaning up the byproducts of coal combustion in power stations and even extracting gas before it is burnt are potential solutions. But timetables and costs for this are vague, as they are for any partial alternatives such as wind and solar.
Wide-ranging attitudes and solutions to climate change are polarising much of the community, creating an environment of unpredictable voter swings for the March 24 election.
Coming up this week in our special issues-based election series, Education and Transport. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
It has housed some of the worst criminals in our history, but Maitland Jail is revealing a more tender side. Since it closed almost a decade ago, the jail has become a tourist attraction, and the more significant parts of the heritage-listed site are being restored, like the 140-year-old chapel. It's here that experts are really chipping away at history.
We had a consultant here looking at the paint scrapings, and she was laboriously, with a scalpel, peeling layers of paint away, and she came across some green, and then a flower emerged.
The flower was one of many, surrounding a relaxing green image of a tropical oasis. In a drab and depressing environment, the mural would have been true escapism for the prisoners viewing it. It's thought the murals, which could be up to a century old, continue up and over the arches of the chapel.
Well, I suspect all the prisoners wanted to escape in some form or other. The jail was a very brutal place. It was notorious as being the housing prison for some of the state's most notorious prisoners, but clearly amongst all of that there was indeed a gentleness of spirit and a desire for softness and, I suppose, an artistic expression.
The chapel is being restored to be used as a wedding and function room, complete with its colourfully painted windows and original ceiling lined with cedar. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
It's not as though Andrew Johns has given up the fight. But it's dust-ups like these with referees that he promises are a thing of the past. Suspended last year for abusing a touch judge, Johns gave up the captaincy altogether after knowing he let frustration get the better of him.
And I'm not proud of what happened, and I wish I could take it back. But what's happened, and I've got to learn from that, and I won't do it again.
He's accepted the captaincy in a shared capacity, with some of the off-field pressures of the position alleviated by a 5-man leadership group headed by Danny Badiris and Steve Simpson. It's all designed to make sure Johns does what he does best on field.
Unless Andrew specifically didn't want to be the captain, it would be ludicrous for him not to be. It brings out the best in him, it's what he does naturally, and it's what everyone wants him to do.
He's been invited to play in a reenactment match to mark the first ever test played between England and a Kiwi team played 100 years ago, which saw the Kiwis boast one famous Australian player, Dally Messenger.
I've always thought, wonder how good it'd be playing behind a Kiwi pack, so there's no worries about me getting injured. I don't think I'll get a bruise.
The match will be played in England in October. Jim Callanan, NBN News.
What an incredible few days it's been for Matt Sargent and his mate. Reunited with his long-time missing Border Collie Cross, there's certainly been some catching up to do. But this is no regular lost and found story. This tale spans almost 3 years from when JD disappeared back in 2004.
Walked around the streets for weeks upon weeks. Put ads in the Herald. Had all my mates out looking for her. Went to the RSPCA, thinking that the microchip should be enough.
Back then, a roaming JD was found and taken in by another family. Late last week, she disappeared from her most recent home, was picked up and taken to the RSPCA, where scans of her microchip linked her back to the original owner, Matt.
He was speechless, absolutely speechless. He couldn't believe that we'd actually found her. It was so touching. She looked at him, he looked at her, and it was just like a family reunion.
The RSPCA says while the family that found JD may have had their hearts in the right places, a whole lot of heartache could have been avoided if they'd had her microchip scanned in the first place. But despite 3 years apart, Matt and his mate don't seem to have skipped a beat or a treat. Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
By his own admission, he's not the most patient of people, but even Andrew Johns concedes rushing back from a hamstring problem is pointless. A run last night, though, proved he's close to being right for a game that means so much on so many levels.
If you take the emotion out of it also, I just want to get a game under my belt before we play the Bulldogs, so I'm desperate to play.
He'll be joined by the likes of Steve Simpson and Adam McDougall for their first hit-outs for the year as well, as the side for the season opener takes shape.
None of them will play the full 80, but we'll nurse them back and hopefully have them ready by round one.
But it's the unfamiliar names of McManus, Uati and Patterson that really stand out on the team sheet. All three have impressed, and if they do so again, they'll remain there for the first game of the season.
James and Koo and Corey have all got themselves into a position where they may well be selected for the first comp game, so we decided we'd have another look and see how they go again.
Rotten luck and problem ankles have combined to limit Jobe Wheelhouse to just 14 games in 2 years. Back to full training for the past month after a second A-League season was ruined by injury, he continues to leap the mental and physical hurdles in his return.
It plays on your mind a bit, but yeah, I just got to try and put it at the back of the mind, and move on, and hopefully I can have a good year this year.
To assist that, he'll play for his junior club Toronto for the first half of the NBN Soccer League competition in order to get some game time.
8 to 10 games, as I said, in any competition's going to be good for me legs. If I can play 90 minutes in most of them games, it's going to keep me in good stead for Olyrood duty and getting back in the A-League in August.
He isn't the only one with those goals in mind, with his club and Australian under-23s teammate Ben Kennedy also set to see some game time at his old club Broadmeadow. Meanwhile, it's the A-League night of nights this evening with the major awards of the season, and Nicky Carl must be a shoo-in for Goal of the Year after his famous effort against Adelaide. While Gary Van Egmond is up for Coach of the Year.
It's been a good season from the Jets' perspective and for myself personally, but if I was a betting man, I think I'd have a few dollars on Ernie.
Jim Callanan, NBN News.
John Tate says children at some Newcastle primary schools are already forced to have lessons in demountable classrooms, and with the growth of inner-city living, the problem is only going to get worse. He says one of the worst examples is Newcastle East Primary.
It's the longest operating, continuous operating school in Australia, and it's got all that heritage and history, and if you plonk portables all around that, it really diminishes the quality of the education for the children, but it also overloads the school. We need another primary school in Newcastle.
But his suggestions have caused a stir at the Newcastle School, which caters for students with disabilities. Mr Tate says students could be moved out of that school to make way for a new inner-city primary. But the school says it's happy where it is.
Around Layman Street, Union Street, there's a facility there which is underutilised, I believe. Still important, but that could be relocated.
The Department of Education says a new school is not needed, as there is still capacity at other city schools like the Junction, Merriweather, Carrington, Islington and Hamilton South.
The inner city population is growing. Families are coming back here, not just empty nesters, and I think we need to be starting to cater for that.
Paul Lobb, NBN News.
The debate over options for the Newcastle rail line demonstrates how contentious public transport can be, stirring up strong opinions. And while the rail line remains, bus services are attracting more attention. There are concerns about frequency of buses, travelling times and destinations, with key stops such as the John Hunter Hospital, the university and the airport lacking dedicated direct services.
The buses, they take too long to get here, and if you miss it, then you have to wait like an extra half an hour, so it's just not practical.
Well, I have to come an hour early to leave an hour early, and I'm here half an hour before the tube.
18-year-old Sanjay Ramzan uses public transport to travel to university, but believes bus services are inadequate at night in the city. He says often the only option is a taxi, which many can't afford.
It's quite bad after around 10 o'clock. Most of the services stop. Especially for those coming, fairly far out.
Many believe a Hunter Transit Authority is needed, a government organisation based in the region, to solve such problems based on priorities for Newcastle, not Sydney. Education has also emerged as a key election issue, with families paying close attention to the policies on offer. Among the hot topics, a maintenance backlog running to more than $100 million.
The state government needs to put more money into infrastructure and capital spending in our public schools.
And Jeff Ainsworth says, like the health system, the education workforce is ageing, the priority to attract more people to teaching.
The average age of teachers is 48, and it's been projected for a number of years now that in the next 5 to 7 years, 40% of those teachers currently teaching will be eligible to retire.
Preschools are also funded by the state, and according to those in the industry, New South Wales trails well behind the rest of Australia in terms of funding allocations, forcing fees higher. Tomorrow night, economic aspirations ahead of the state election. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Thank God
it was at that time, because this is the quiet time. We've always got children running before their parents and people everywhere. And this side of the street's usually very busy.
Maitland Mayor Peter Blackmore was visiting Newcastle today, but he couldn't wait to get back to Maitland.
There's no truth in the fact that we're looking at taking over Newcastle and adding it to Maitland.
The growth of Maitland is through the roof. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the city grew by 1,400 people last year. That's up 2.3% to almost 63,000. Compared to other parts of the Hunter, Maitland is growing twice as fast as Cessnock, 3 times as quickly as Newcastle and Muswellbrook, and 11 times faster than Lake Macquarie. The Mayor says his city has plenty to offer.
It's younger people that are moving in, buying houses, and of course it is affordable. Our geographic location, I believe, is to our advantage, that within 30 minutes you're in Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Port Stephens.
Meantime, Newcastle has lost its mantle of Australia's 6th largest city. The figures reveal there are now 554,000 people living in the Gold Coast Tweed region, compared to 512,000 in the Greater Newcastle area. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
Sydney supplied quite a backdrop for the A-League's Night of Nights, but no awards remained in the Harbour City by the end of it. After winning the minor and major premierships, Melbourne's Ernie Merrick was named Coach of the Year and Daniel Allslop won the Golden Boot. But the biggest gong headed to Newcastle. Nicky Carl named Player of the Year and awarded the Johnny Warren Medal.
I'm over the moon, you know. As I've said to a few people tonight, it's such a privilege and an honour considering the players that there are in the league.
His form was hard to ignore, as was that of his side, which famously turned its season around to fall just a game short of the grand final. And it was those teammates Carl was quick to thank.
But the boys said what a turnaround they did, you know, to show such character and determination.
With the medal proudly on show, it's more Socceroo caps he's keen to wear after just one appearance in the senior green and gold.
I did what I could during this season, and I'm hoping my performance on the field will help me out.
If selectors need any further convincing, Carl was also awarded Goal of the Season for his incredible effort against Adelaide in the second round, where he went the length of the field before booting home the stunning winner. Jim Callanan, NBN News. Like more than the odd good idea, this one began over a game of golf a year ago, and now the brainchild of 2 friends has grown into the East Coast Swing. Put simply, it's 7 Pro-Am golf tournaments run mostly back-to-back over 12 days on the Central Coast and Hunter regions in August.
We've been struggling here in the last couple of years for Pro-Ams. We've had a couple, but now we've all pulled together and it should be 2 fantastic weeks of golf.
7 major clubs are involved, with Merriweather's 2-day event teeing things off in mid-August. Gosford and Charlestown are among those hosting events that boasts a combined prize purse of $115,000. Culminating at Morisset, an additional $10,000 will be awarded to the most consistent players on the circuit.
To finally get the backing of the company that loves supporting golf is just, it's great. It's great for Pete and it's great for myself that, we spoke about it. We've got it off the ground now and, all these pros are going to enjoy the benefits of it.
And it's expected the East Coast Swing will only grow with some big plans in place for the circuit, which is already the richest of its kind for New South Wales.
Eventually we'd love to think we'd get someone like Nathan Green back to the area just for a week or something. It's all dreams, but you never know what might happen over the next couple of years. So it'd be great to do that for the Newcastle area.
Jim Callanan, NBN News.
Kyle, Lachlan, Callan and Matthew look like ordinary Year 8 students, but recently the boys did something quite extraordinary. Having completed a compulsory surf survival skills course through school, the lads' newly honed skills were put to the test when they came across some tourists in trouble near where they were bodyboarding.
One of the mates said, "Help, go save my friend, he's in trouble," so Matthew, paddled over there and gave the man his board and pushed him onto a wave while he swam over out of the break.
Rescuing the other man wasn't quite as easy.
I said, ride a wave into shore, and he didn't know how to do that, so I had to grab the cord and just backstroke into shore, and then we got into shore and he said thanks and he shook my hand. And
the boys got such a buzz out of it, they're now considering further training, making it all worthwhile for lifeguard and mentor Jeff Mowbray.
A lot of time you've got to yell at them because they're not paying attention, but you're just wondering, does it get through? And this sort of proves to you that it is getting through, they are listening.
Jessica Phyllis, NBN News.
We've lost so much of our language and our history and our culture, and a lot of it has been through the fact that we haven't had the tools previously to record it ourselves and manage it ourselves, and computers is the way to do that.
Probably around a week or 10 days, he'll make his mind up. He's got a girlfriend in England, which makes it difficult.
He's been convicted under Hong Kong's Prevention of Bribery Act. That's the title on the law, but specifically what he's found guilty of is that he conspired to accept money from illegal bookmakers. It was taking advantage of the legalese that the lawyers are using here. In other words, he gave some illegal bookmakers tips on the horses that he was riding. In return, they put bets on that horse for him. Sometimes he lost, sometimes he's won. More often than not, though, he won. And he was actually filmed at a hotel receiving about $40,000 equivalent Australian dollars stuffed into his jeans pockets. It was alleged in court that in total, that through this conspiracy, Muntz earned about $130,000 Australian. It was from December 2005 to the middle of 2006.
A local consortium, which includes high-profile business people Hilton Grujon and Jeff McCloy, will soon lodge a bid to build a shipping terminal on the old BHP site to handle car imports and other cargo. The automotive industry says it wants to unload imports in Newcastle, and now the AWU says the government has got it wrong by spending big bucks developing Port Kembla.
I believe so. I believe that most of their eggs should be put in the Newcastle port basket.
But the Premier says his three-port plan is sound and Newcastle will eventually get a go. But that plan will take decades to play out, and those backing the private Newcastle bid hope to get cars rolling onto the docks much sooner. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
Over the last 3 nights, we've outlined transport, health, police and education as areas needing more funding from the state government, with a request for $100 million for public school maintenance alone. But how can all these election promises be funded, and where does the money come from?
That's the role of government to balance how the plans it commits to
how it funds them, whether it's debt funding or revenue raising or cost reduction or PPPs.
And while voters want services improved, they don't necessarily want to pay more tax, and that's the challenge for politicians to strike a happy medium.
If we look at what options the state government has available to it, we see why land tax has risen by 79% in the last 5 years. We see why payroll tax has risen by 35% in the last 5 years.
Development is another key election issue which can polarise political parties, but the former BHP Steelworks site is one of those rare cases when most agree that something needs to be done. A multi-purpose terminal and a car import facility top the wish list, but according to the Hunter Business Chamber, we need to improve the current transport network and connectivity to the site. Redeveloping Newcastle West to generate business and revitalise the area is another priority for many.
We're doing some work with the Law Society and other stakeholders to see whether it's possible to establish a court precinct, as has been done in Parramatta.
The old Royal Newcastle Hospital is another key development site which could have a profound economic impact, its future use dividing many voters. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News.
Some of Newcastle's busiest streets like Hunter, Derby and Beaumont have been branded no-go zones after midnight by the business community. They say gangs of violent, intoxicated vandals rule the areas.
Property's not safe, people are not safe. The business community as a whole are just fed up with the way things have been allowed to develop.
According to the Bureau of Crime Statistics, the number of assaults in Newcastle has dropped by 4% over the past 24 months. But Dr Arne Sprogus believes the statistic is misleading.
My guess is, and now it's a guess, less than 10% of assaults are reported, which is an appalling statistic. If young people feel they can't report assaults and have something done about it, that's appalling.
The business community is now calling on police to conduct more nighttime foot patrols and enforce lockouts on licensed premises after 1 a.m.
I've been in the city for 30 years as a retailer and it's never been as bad as it is now.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
When Brisbane firm AP Eagers made its bid for the Closter Motor Group in December last year, the deal required the 12 car manufacturers Closters represents to individually endorse the takeover. With agreements or letters of support from brands as diverse as BMW, Ford and VW, the Closters sale was finalised early last night. Eagers has paid a total of $63 million for the vehicle dealerships, comprising $29 million for the business and $34 million for the motor group's land and buildings. The new owner will continue spending with improvements planned for the Closter-owned car yards at Cardiff and Maitland. Meantime, Cabcharge Australia is tomorrow expected to announce it has made a successful takeover offer for Newcastle Taxis Limited. Over the past 6 weeks, shareholders in the Hamilton-based taxi business have been considering the offer, which by today had received 98% acceptance. Cabcharge says it will be business as usual for Newcastle Taxis once the takeover is completed. Gary Blair, NBN News.
There was much waving of arms, pointing and positioning as Morris Yema's pre-election show rolled into Newcastle today. Police were organised to chase down and pull over a pre-arranged hoon who was subjected to a fake breath test and had his licence checked in a carefully stage-managed display ahead of the Premier's anti-hoon policy announcement.
We're going to give the police extra powers, which will involve the power to be able to have these cars clamped, taken to the owner's home, so that the owners and the car hoons can sit there and look at their cars in the garage or the driveway, but they won't be on the streets. It will mean safer streets and it'll mean effectively stopping the car hoons in their tracks.
The event took 3 police away from normal duties for 2 hours and tied up 2 patrol cars, but the Premier maintained it was important for them to be there.
Well, it's a demonstration. The activities of the police are a very fine highway patrol officer who's outlined to me not just the risks in his own job, but the steps that he goes through to keep our streets safe.
Paul Lobb, NBN News. This huge shed next to the Newcastle Airport terminal at Williamtown is Jetstar's new $29 million maintenance workshop. It's big enough to house an Airbus A320 and will be used to service the carrier's fleet of 23 aircraft. Money from the BHP Trust and the state government helped Jetstar establish its new hangar. 120 people work here, including 25 young apprentices like Katie Lee from the Newcastle suburb of Stockton, who's combining TAFE with her trade.
I'm doing avionic engineering, so that's working on the electrical and navigation systems in the aeroplane.
Jetstar CEO Alan Joyce, a former Dubliner, says Newcastle is now an important hub in the company's operations.
We're looking at growing our A320 fleet by hopefully doubling the size of the fleet over the next 5 or 6 years. And we see a lot more services into Newcastle because we continually have to get aircraft here for maintenance. And every time we add a service, we get the services filled. The demand that we're seeing out of Newcastle has been exceptional.
Newcastle Airport has certainly grown in terms of our aviation business, but what we're now really focusing on also is the aerospace industry, which we see being the long-term driver for economic growth and for employment throughout the Hunter.
Paul Lobb, NBN News.
Word from today's summit is that the All-Aboriginal competition will go ahead with or without CRL affiliation. Today, the underlying social issues were laid on the table as both parties tried to sort out their differences.
So we're going to try and get everyone playing rugby league, and that's the end result, hopefully.
Far from an all-out rivalry, the two competitions could eventually share grounds and referees. League great Arthur Beetson is in favour of the nation's rugby league comp that would involve 14 teams from the coast to Bourke.
But the big problem here is that we're trying to sort out why a lot of our people are being denied the opportunity to play our game.
The CRL will finalise its position in a fortnight, while the Rebel League will continue with trial matches. Meanwhile, the Newcastle Knights are finalising preparations for their clash with Cronulla in Cessnock on Saturday. One of the club's former juniors looking forward to wearing the red and blue again in front of a Hunter crowd in any position.
Wherever the coach wants to put me, mate, as long, it's always good to just be on the field, so that's really all that matters.
Mitchell Hughes, NBN News. They're two of the country's most respected fighters, but they admit they know very little about each other.
Not a lot, just that he's very experienced, tough, strong, good shape. So, it'd be a really tough fight.
Despite an 18-year age gap, both men remain cautious but confident about their chances in the cruiserweight title bout.
I'm 42 years old and he's 24, so it's a big difference. But like I said, I wouldn't be doing this if I'm not fit.
42-year-old Nerman Sabanovic boasts an impressive record as well as an amazing past. After leaving war-torn Bosnia for Australia in 1993, Sabanovic was due to fight for a national title in '94, but an accident involving a drunk driver forced him out of the ring for almost 10 years.
Only 10 days before the fight, I had an accident, and it stopped my career, stopped everything. It was very hard for me.
Local boy Daniel Aman is showing the experienced fighter plenty of respect, putting his immediate career plans on hold.
But really not looking past this fight.
The bout will be the feature event at Newcastle Panthers tomorrow night. Mitchell Hughes, NBN News.
88-year-old Lily Wood, known to many in Cooks Hill as the Cat Lady for her love of animals, lived her entire life in this modest house. Early this morning, she died there after she was confronted by an intruder. A witness across the street saw a woman enter the veranda where Lily was sleeping just after 3 a.m. The witness called 000, the woman ran off, and when officers arrived, Lily was dead. There were tears today as the news filtered through to her many acquaintances.
It's a disgrace. It's terrible. How could somebody do that to her?
She was lovely. She's known us for years. She's watched our daughter grow from, when I was pregnant to now. She's nearly 5. So, it's just a terrible shame. So I'm going to have to explain to her today why there's no more Lily.
A bunch of lilies tied to a pole summed up the feelings of many in the community. Police are tight-lipped about their suspect, but they did arrest a woman near the scene early this morning and are treating the case as a murder.
Until we've determined the exact cause of the death of the lady, we will treat it as suspicious and as a crime scene, yes.
It's not the first time Lily has been the target of thieves.
People were always taking things, like someone had broken in the front of her place and taken some things probably about 2 weeks ago, and someone had taken her walker, probably about a year ago. So there's always people preying on her because she was just a lovely old lady.
For the last 40 years, if not longer, she's been taking in the stray animals around Newcastle, and she takes care of them very much like they're her own children. She's very fond of animals and she's got a very big heart.
Her black cat, the last of many she's cared for, was a little bewildered today. There'll be no Lily to feed it tonight. Paul Lobb, NBN News.
While the dignitaries took care of the official part of today's announcement, construction crews got to work on the $52 million federal government project. When complete, the Weeklies Drive interchange will alleviate a dangerous bottleneck, providing a new link road connecting the interchange to Glenwood Drive between Thornton and Beresfield. It will also include a flyover to take the New England Highway over Weeklies Drive and eliminate 3 close-set intersections.
It's a project that's been much needed, but a project that's also dragged on 10 years too long and blown out from $12 million to $52 million.
The interchange will benefit more than just motorists.
It's also going to mean the opening up of Maitland's newest suburb, Thornton North, that we'll be able to see an area which is going to cater for another 9,600 residents.
Meanwhile, the state government has agreed to take over the existing Thornton Rail Bridge and replace it with a new structure to allow a major development at Thornton North to go ahead. Madeline Bond, NBN News.
For those interested in the political machinations of the Labor Party, it's been an eventful 10 months leading up to the state election. Among the controversy, the emergence of independents, with former MP Bryce Gaudry and Lord Mayor John Tate looking to shake up the region's political landscape. That's making the normally safe ALP seat of Newcastle one of the state election's tightest contests.
The independents are a reflection of a slightly growing trend, perhaps worrying for the major parties, but perhaps also desirable in terms of a healthy democracy.
Jim Jose from the University of Newcastle says there's a rise of independents across the state due to dissatisfaction with dominant parties.
The independents that have emerged out of the Labor ranks are a result of Labor Party shenanigans, and if they suffer for it, well, so be it, and that's their doing.
And the distribution of preferences will be crucial in the seat of Newcastle and will have a major influence on the outcome, with most of the candidates expected to run neck and neck.
I think on the first round, it's unlikely that anyone will get 50% plus one and therefore in that event, it's likely to go down. It will go down to preferences.
In basic terms, preferences work like this. Let's say we have 3 candidates and each gets a percentage of votes on the primary round. Then the candidate with the least amount of votes is taken out and their second preferences are redistributed. That continues until one candidate has more than 50% of the vote. Jane Goldsmith, NBN News. The sight of a cute koala can really tug at the heartstrings, and doesn't council know it? There's no doubt targeting blackbutt reserve as a money saver by scaling back the animals or charging an entry fee will upset families.
We come here once a week. Sometimes we come more often than that if playgroup have a day up here, and we would just have to stop coming because we couldn't afford it.
That's what I love about blackbutt, is that it's free, it's inviting.
The council needs $764 million over the next 20 years to maintain infrastructure, but parents believe blackbutt should not be on the hit list.
I shouldn't be assumed that the animals are going to be taken out of there without any warning or without any reason. In fact, I don't think that'll happen.
Ironically, Council today announced it's spending $1.4 million on extending the Beresfield golf course from 11 to 16 holes.
Council is continually under pressure to maintain the infrastructure that we have, but this facility is not a drain on that money because it's able to generate enough to plough back into it to keep the facility going.
It's the date that fishermen have been dreading and environmentalists anticipating for more than 12 months. April 21st was today announced as the official start date of the controversial Port Stephens Great Lakes Marine Park. The only change to the released zonings, a small piece of fishing ground at Swan Bay at Port Stephens.
A small area along the shore converted from sanctuary zone to habitat protection zone so they can fish, as they've always done off that area. It's predominantly mudflats. We don't believe it is that significant environmentally.
While the park was originally expected to come into effect this week, Minister for Primary Industries Ian McDonald says more time is needed to educate the public and finalise commercial fishing buybacks. Despite concerns the complex zonings will confuse the public, Mr McDonald is confident the park will be introduced without incident.
Like our previous parks, once they're in place and people are informed of the various boundaries within that park, it's worked pretty smoothly as it does in the others.
Veteran meteorologist Martin Babbicon says long-range forecasting is difficult, but the father of three from Merewether, who teaches trainee air pilots about the weather, predicts a change in favour of the Liberals on March 24th. John Tate has spent 27 years serving on Newcastle Council, the last 8 of those as Lord Mayor. He's running as an independent and wants the job in Macquarie Street to give Newcastle a bigger voice on important local issues. Jodie McKay is quite at home in a television studio, having presented the news in Newcastle for many years. She was controversially installed as the state Labor candidate after Bryce Gaudry was dumped by the state Labor executive. But not one to lie down, Bryce Gaudry, a veteran of 4 terms as state Labor member for Newcastle, is now running against Labor as an independent. He says he still has the support of many of the city's ALP party faithful. And Michael Osborne brings a green alternative to the debate. The environmental engineer has served as a Newcastle councillor for 3 years and says he wants a local voice in state parliament rather than having Sydney people deciding our future.
The first game in the year, you just got that self-doubt in your head that whether you still got it and whether you've done enough work and that sort of thing. So hopefully after a couple of tackles and runs, all the self-doubt will go.
After yesterday's fun and games, it was down to business at Phillip Island for the Hunter duo, and with the risk of poor weather tomorrow, riders were keen to post some quick times today with grid positions up for grabs, and Kevin Curtin was on top of things early. The fastest in morning sessions, the lap record was under threat in the afternoon. It did fall, but to Fabien Foray, the Frenchman turning back the clock to secure a provisional pole position for Sunday's 21-lap race. Brock Parks was fourth best overall, as the Yamaha men hope this year is the one.
We've had a year now to do it, and I'm hoping, and I've got my fingers crossed, and I hope everyone else is going for me also that's got their fingers crossed.
Curtin was second at the season opener in Qatar last weekend, while Parks will be out for a big weekend after he was forced to retire in round one.
They're bloodthirsty little suckers, and they can do a lot of harm. Over the past month, Hunter New England Health has received a steady increase in the number of people infected with Barmah forest virus and Ross River fever, which are transmitted through mosquito bites.
There's about 30 different types of mosquitoes in New South Wales, and of course it's only 50%, or the females of those, that are going to cause you problems.
Out of those 30 species, only 3 or 4 are capable of carrying the diseases. But there are a few simple things we can do to reduce the risk of being infected.
Any sources of water around your home, make sure that they're well drained, or if you can't do that, just put sand in it.
When outside during prime mosquito time around dusk or dawn, you should also cover up with light, loose-fitting clothing and wear an insect repellent containing the chemical DEET. Madeline Bond, NBN News. Peter Debnam was going to great heights to sell his new policy to the Hunter today. Although it's been widely criticised, Mr Debnam says reducing the age of criminal responsibility from 14 to 10 will benefit areas like Port Stephens.
But what we want to do is say to those kids, we're going to hold you to account, we're going to put you back on the tracks.
Police agree juvenile crime is a big problem in the area and residents want more to be done. The past few months have seen vandal attacks in Tanilba Bay, while the Raymond Terrace McDonald's has been gutted by fire, although police can't confirm that was started by young people.
There's a social issue problem with teenagers on the street at all hours of the night.
We don't really see them. They're pretty fast in what they do. But we've got a good idea. A lot of things start after school time and before school times.
In addition to his new policy, Mr Debnam again flagged the possibility of creating a local area command based in Raymond Terrace.
This local area command is simply too big. Police don't have the resources to manage the geographic area. We need to break it up and have 2 local area commands.
Madeline Bond, NBN News.
I love it. It's everything I'd hoped for. Absolutely everything I'd hoped for.
Proudly showing off the Australian cruiserweight belt, Daniel Aman was under no illusions this title defence was going to be tough. Nerman Savanovic had twice represented Yugoslavia at the Olympics, but now aged 43, he knew this would be his last chance of winning an Australian title. It was a real tight affair. Neither fighter able to gain a clear advantage as the bout went deep into the 10 rounds. The challenger keeping up his end of the bargain, while the champ used his reach to exceed to rack up points as well. Sabanovic searched for the knockout he knew he needed in the closing rounds, but when the final bell tolled, both fighters thought they'd done enough. In the end, it was a split points decision favouring Aman. With the challenger now contemplating retirement, Aman plans to defend his title again in Newcastle during April.